let's talk with Andrew. Andrew was helpful with our little audio issue. We pulled him in for a minute.
Absolutely. Let's talk to Andrew. Andrew is calling about an analysis of what it means to believe something and the nature of disbelief or the lack of belief. Andrew in Pennsylvania, you're live with Eric and V.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. So you wanted to talk about the nature of belief or nature of disbelief?
Well, yeah, almost a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think, we talk a lot about epistemology, right? Which is pretty much, it's definitionally the study of belief. So I think it's kind of useful through that lens that we actually have a definition of belief and a further understanding of what it means to hold a belief.
Sure. I personally define belief as that which I accept to be true.
Okay.
How do you define it?
Well, it's fairly close towards that. But I think as an addendum, I've also looked at the nature of of the material reality of belief.
What do you mean?
Well, kind of in a sense of how does it exist in the mind? Like, what is it? Like, what are we talking about?
I don't know if I would call that epistemology at that point. I think that would get a little bit more into ontology. What is?
Well,
do you know what I mean?
I understand what you mean here. That, yeah, this is, whenever we're talking about it in terms of epistemology, it is purely in the idealistic. But I don't think we can necessarily understand the idealistic without understanding its relation to the materialistic.
Well, hit us. I'm really curious.
Well, whenever I think about belief, there is certainly a concept where it's related to thought, to concepts, to the metaphysical. But the fact that it has a relationship towards us kind of suggests that it has, something else that's very, I'm trying to think about this.
Can I ask maybe a clarifying question that might help direct this a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, because I'm super curious about this. Are you talking specifically about, like, if we were to ask somebody to describe a belief that they held while they were in an MRI machine, like, are you talking about what would pop up in their brain, like what would light up? Or are you talking about, like, beliefs themselves as self-contained existent things that we're accessing?
Oh, yeah, it's much more the latter, where
okay.
It's something that is connected towards actual events that are happening, the way we're feeling, the things that have an unquestionable material reality towards them, and how they kind of interconnect and help us define.
Okay.
Well, it helps us give us a sense of what we're talking about.
Sure. So in my mind, when I think about this kind of a thing, I look at a computer, and when I see a program on a computer, I know that the program's there. I can access it, and I know that it is stored in ones and zeros on my hard drive. But it's kind of curious when you when you talk about the program in the computer versus, working in the program. So what kind of point did you want to make? I know we're kind of circling it, but what did you want to talk to about it? Talk with us about with it in regards to.
Well, if we can possibly, because there's so much about the idea of material reality belief, about what we can and possibly can talk about. There's also the relationship that I have towards the idea of having a lack of that belief and what that means for us, us as atheists.
So what is it? It sounds like you're giving us a lot of preamble to what?
Well,
to what end?
Well, to what end? I think whenever we talk about belief and a lack thereof, there's kind of a sense that it's something that we've constructed intentionally. Like, oh, that's something that we believe, we hold it, it's something that we control, but it might not actually be. It might be much more a condition of our environment, and a much more so the effect of society on us as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, with that part, at least, I don't know where we're going from here, but yeah, I don't think we are in control of what we believe until that belief is changed and we decide to pursue that, right? Like when I was a Christian, I didn't have a choice about whether or not I believed. I just did. That was the environment I grew up in. It was real to that group of people. So being part of that group, that was just kind of the default. And then the only choice I made was to follow that intuition out. But the actual change of mind wasn't an intentional thing so much. So yeah, if you're talking about people who believe certain things because it's a given in that culture, the reason we think Noah's Ark is any less fantastical than any other, religious myth about a big flood, then yeah, absolutely, I think you're right. Are you saying that we can judge whether or not those beliefs are accurate based on? I don't know. Where are you going from here?
Yeah, I'm super curious, Andrew, but it doesn't have a lot of direction. Can you help us out?
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about that and looking that up and trying to parse that, there is this one study that's kind of trying to, I think, give some type of basis towards that. Well, it's not even a study. It's a paper that's collective of studies.
Towards what?
The origins of this paper is called the Origins of Religious Disbelief.
Okay.
And I'm just referencing it as a concept.
Sure.
Here, just kind of to give myself some degree of data to work off of.
About what? I'm still curious about what we're talking about in the subject of this conversation. We're about 8 minutes in.
Okay, can I read the abstract?
Yeah,
I just pulled up the paper, and it might help us guide this a little bit.
Okay, cool.
All right, so the paper is published in the National Library of Medicine, called The Origins of Religious Disbelief. This was in 2013. The abstract says, although most people are religious, there are hundreds of millions of religious disbelievers in the world. What is religious disbelief, and how does it arise? Recent developments in the scientific study of religious beliefs and behaviors point to the conclusion that religious disbelief arises from multiple interacting pathways traceable to cognitive, motivational, and cultural learning mechanisms. We identify 4 such pathways leading to 4 distinct forms of atheism, which we term mind-blind atheism. Ooh, that sounds like a band name. Apatheism, incredulous atheism, and analytic atheism. Religious belief and disbelief share the same underlying pathways and can be explained within a single evolutionary framework that is grounded in both genetic and cultural evolution.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting. I definitely want to read this paper.
I mean, when you're talking about belief in anything, it's absolutely grounded in all of those things. And so the fact that it's phrased about that makes it sound like it's exclusive to religious belief and disbelief, when in fact it has to do with everything.
Well, I think it's just a function of being, contained in your research. So I doubt that it would be like, this only applies to this. But it sounds like what they're saying is you can come to a belief or a lack of belief through multiple different pathways, including just not being aware of it or analyzing it and coming away with a different conclusion.
Or not caring about it at all.
Right. So is that what you're saying? Like there are different ways of believing or disbelieving things?
Oh, yeah. If you go down the paper, it actually shows very interesting correlation that the what they call dual inheritance approach, or just dual inheritance, actually tends to be a bigger predictor as to why a person would become a non-believer, a non-religious person.
I guess where I'm kind of out of the, help me out here. Why? Why should I care? Why is this important? Why is this meaningful to talk about?
Important?
Yeah. Why is this meaningful for us to talk about?
Well, that one issue, the one thing that seems to be a higher predictor of it, it's talking about how it doesn't seem to be that people are self-reflecting as to why. People aren't going back into their life and really thinking, oh, does this concept make sense? They're more as to why they become non-religious. They're more so becoming non-religious, or in terms of what's influencing them, or seemingly is their lack of exposure or proper exposure towards a religious concept that would help reinforce belief in something like a god or something else.
But that really, I can imagine that being true for other people, but that runs contrary to our lived experience, because we were deeply, deeply exposed to a religious childhood, religious growing up, and tons of indoctrination.
Indecently exposed to Christianity. I think there's an interesting. I think that there are definitely ways that this could be spun to make it reasonable, and I would have to read the paper. I'll link it in the description of this call so everybody has access to it. But I also think that that's kind of the case with all belief, right? Like, there are beliefs that we have because we've analyzed things, for sure, but that does make up a smaller subsection of just the things we don't believe because we don't have access to the correct information, right? Like, do we have free will? I don't know. It's not because I've analyzed a thing and come to a conclusion that I disbelieve in a thing. It's because there's really no way to know, and I haven't gotten the evidence yet. So it kind of falls in line with agnosticism in my mind. Again, though, Andrew, my question for you is, what are you doing with this paper that made you want to call? Is this something that you are struggling with? Is this something that you're seeing Christians run with as like an example of, well, you just haven't seen all of the data? Or like, what about this paper made you want to call us today?
Well, it made me think about my own history, because I was also a religious person before I became an atheist, and it really made me question whether or not I was really changing my mind because I came to a logical conclusion, or did I just have a history where I thought I had a devout, belief, and in actuality, I just, didn't. I just had I was allowed to read the right kind of books that would make me an atheist, or I was allowed to, not go to church enough times to not be an atheist. Just whether or not what's that?
What I was going to say is, it sounds like you're moving into an axiom. You're talking about what ought to be a good reason. And so let's say you are an atheist because you were never exposed to religion whatsoever. Right. And so you never had the chance to evaluate it and decide whether or not it's true. You're an atheist because you don't believe that thing. Do you think that's valid? Because it sounds like you're questioning whether or not it's valid to disbelieve for that reason. When in fact, when we're just talking about what is, there are lots of reasons people disbelieve. But if you're talking about the axiom of the things that I believe I should get to that by evaluating the evidence, by being given every opportunity to understand and then make an educated choice. That is one way to get there, but it sounds like it's just saying that there are lots of ways people get to other beliefs. So when you're talking about that, kind of what's in my mind is like, it sounds like Andrew's gatekeeping themselves, is Andrew saying, oh, well, because maybe I didn't learn enough, did I not get enough of an opportunity to make an educated choice? But whether you did or not, you're still an atheist. You just may have gotten there through a venue that you feel is less valid. Does that sound about right? Because that's kind of what that's cluing me into.
It does. I sometimes I wonder if a lot of people would avoid calling themselves an atheist because they just see themselves so differently. Like, oh, well, I just need to find God. still. Or
oh, yeah. I think V and I both went through that phase when we were deconverting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is no one right way to become an atheist. That's something that I've held to since leaving the faith myself. And there are people who I would even say, hey, if you don't want to be a part of the church, you don't have to. You don't even have to be an atheist. It doesn't have to be a matter of disbelief. You can just stop being a Christian if you want to. So there's definitely this level of, well, you need to prove that you did all of the work and all of the homework. Show your homework, show your work to prove that you are actually an atheist or that you came here for the right reasons, you know? And that is a function of being not a second class, but like it happens with a lot of different groups, right? Like if you deviate from the norm, then you have to prove to the norm that you are justifiably different. And that happens across the board, and atheism does suffer from that as well. And a lot of that is internalized, because if we all three of us came from a religious background where we internalize this idea that, well, if you leave, you better have a darn good reason for it, because otherwise, you know, you're betraying your faith or you're making a mistake, then we will carry that forward. And I know I have. So yeah, I'm going to read this paper. I'm going to look into it a little bit more, and I would encourage our viewers to do so as well. It will be linked.
Sorry.
But my point here is that this one paper cannot tell you were doing this right or wrong. If you had an experience that made you an atheist, if God himself came down to you and said, I do not exist, therefore you no longer get to have faith, and took that faith away from you, you're an atheist now. That's just the definition of that thing, right? So don't worry too much about questioning how you got here. Now that you're here, what are you going to do with it?
And on top of that, really, I mean, I kind of want to push back on that just a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that a big piece of the thrust of this show is called Skeptic Generation, you know, and we want to promote skepticism. And so any avenues in which we're able to apply skepticism, we value those things. If you did not get to the conclusions you came to through skepticism, that's okay. But it sounds like you're applying skepticism right now and going, okay, well, you know, maybe I got here for a bad reason, or maybe, you know, I could have a flawed way in the way I'm thinking about things. And that is admirable for you to do. You know, apply that skepticism. And if it gets you excited, then learn and study and just dive right into it. Because the important thing for us, we encourage skepticism because it is applicable everywhere, not just in religious talks, but in everything you do in your life. It is such a useful tool. And if you're wanting to apply skepticism there, that's fantastic. But while you're doing that, don't undercut yourself. Because if you are the kind of person who's likely to look at your world and go, what if I'm wrong? What if, you know, it could be another way? Then the more you explore and learn about the world around you, the better informed you're going to be, and the better you're going to be at, you know, justifying those views if anyone ever brings that up. And that's fantastic. You know, it's a skill set that you're growing, and that's wonderful, but don't undercut yourself in the meantime.
That's a really good point.
Well, yeah. I do really sympathize with, I think, everybody who's going through the process. I feel like I'm kind of emotionally outside of the process at this point. Like, it doesn't affect me in a way that really could upset me. But certainly lots of people are going through a pretty tough time with that. And whenever I look at it, I if I feel like, oh, I have reasons to believe, I'll be okay, I believe. But I currently don't see any reason to believe. So I'm kind of dispassionately atheist at this point. When before I was very passionate. When you get to a certain point in it, I call it apatheism. It sounds like the study calls it apatheism as well, which is amazing. It's the first time I ever heard it referenced like that. But
that's okay. And I encourage you to continue on the journey. Hopefully this conversation has been useful. I know that it's definitely been useful for us. It's fun to kind of explore those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate you.
Sure. Thanks.
Take care.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah.
Starting out academic today.
It is.